All right, so today we're diving into a Premier League match. It might look like a straightforward win for Manchester City, but trust me, there's a lot more to it. We're talking Leicester City versus Manchester City on December 29th, 2024. And to help break it all down, we're using SofaScore.
What's really interesting about this match, I think, is that it shows those strategic battles that happen all the time in a Premier League season.
Yeah.
You've got two teams, they've got totally different goals, different strengths and weaknesses, and different pressures.
Okay, so the basics. Manchester City wins this one, right? 2-0. Sounds pretty decisive. But this was at Leicester's home turf, King Power Stadium, during round 19 of the Premier League.
Yeah, so both teams are pretty far into the season at this point, right?
Yeah.
And the league table is starting to, really take shape. And then that's where things get kind of interesting.
Yeah, because Leicester City is way down there in 18th place, trying not to get relegated. But Manchester City, well, even though they're not as dominant as usual, they're still sitting pretty in 7th.
Exactly. So you've got one team that's fighting for every single point they can get, and another team that, while they want to win, they can also sort of think about the bigger picture a little bit.
Okay, so let's talk about how this actually played out on the pitch. Savinho scores for Manchester City pretty early, right? Like 21st minute. Doesn't that usually spell trouble for the other team?
Not necessarily. I mean, some teams, they actually play better when they're under pressure. But what's interesting here is how Leicester responded. They didn't just fall apart. If you look at their passing accuracy in the 10 minutes after that goal, it actually went up. They were trying to keep possession, build from the back, not panic.
So they had a plan. But then, of course, Erling Haaland, Manchester City's goal machine, scores in the 74th minute. Savinho with the assist again. So is that game over at that point?
Well, Haaland's goal is interesting, not just because it's, Haaland, but because it shows kind of this tactical weakness Leicester has been struggling with all season. They just have a hard time defending against those fast counterattacks. Look at the way Savinho's through ball just splits their back line wide open. They're caught out of position, and Haaland, being Haaland, makes them pay for it.
Yeah, you'd think at this point Leicester would be pretty deflated, maybe even get a little reckless. And we do see that a bit with those 2 yellow cards they pick up. Boubakary Soumaré gets one for a foul in the 56th minute, and then Bilal El Khanous picks one up in the 65th minute, also for a foul.
I don't know if I'd say those cards are a sign of, recklessness. Yeah, they're aggressive tackles, but they're also kind of calculated risks. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Leicester had to disrupt Manchester City's rhythm somehow. And those fouls, well, they might be a bit cynical, but they were definitely attempts to do just that.
Hold on, so are you saying there's a difference between a frustrated foul and a tactical foul?
Oh, absolutely. A frustrated foul, that's usually out of anger or desperation, right?
Yeah.
But a tactical foul, that's a deliberate choice. It's usually to stop a really dangerous attack or slow down the game.
And then, get this, Manchester City's goalkeeper, Stefan Ortega, he gets a yellow card in the 78th minute for time wasting. That seems, I don't know, kind of cheeky.
It's a classic veteran move. But yeah, kind of risky.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have totally backfired if Leicester had managed to score off of any set pieces or, those scrambles in the box near the end.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these little details can actually tell you a lot about what's going on in the players' heads and the manager's head.
Right. Every decision, every action, even something like a time-wasting yellow card is all part of the story. It's like this tactical narrative.
So substitutions. 70th minute, Manchester City puts Kyle Walker in for Nathan Ake. Pretty typical defensive substitution, right?
It might seem like that. But think about this. The substitution happens right after Haaland scores, right? This could mean that Manchester City's manager was already thinking about locking down the game, making sure their defense was solid to protect that 2-goal lead.
Interesting. So they're not just sitting back, even with a comfy lead. They're still being strategic.
Exactly. And then you've got Leicester City subbing out James Justin for Hamza Chowdhury. Could be a response to Walker coming on, or maybe Leicester's manager saw a chance to, I don't know, kind of shake things up in the midfield, right, as they're trying to come back.
So even the substitutions are part of this back and forth between the managers, like a chess match.
Absolutely. That's what makes looking at these individual matches so interesting. It's not just about the score. It's about understanding the choices, the tactics, the mental game, that's happening all through those 90 minutes.
Before we get to the rest of the substitutions, I want to talk about SofaScore's attack momentum, because I think that helps to show what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really cool, because you can see how the game actually flowed visually. It's not just about possession. It's about which team is making more dangerous chances, who's pushing forward, who's setting the tempo.
So instead of just looking at the score, we're getting a feel for, the rhythm of the match, right?
Exactly. And that's super important for understanding how those other substitutions we'll talk about, how they really impacted the game. So there's this one substitution that really got me thinking. Manchester City takes out Phil Foden, and he's one of their best attackers, really creative, and puts in James McAtee in the 66th minute.
That is interesting, especially because it's before Holland scores that second goal, which you'd think would kind of seal the deal.
Exactly. This is where SofaScore's attack momentum really comes in handy, What if, even though they're up 1-0, Manchester City was actually losing momentum at that point?
So you're thinking maybe their attack wasn't as strong as it could have been, even though they were winning.
Right. Maybe Foden wasn't playing his best. Or maybe the manager saw something, a weakness in Leicester's defense that McAtee could take advantage of better. Either way, taking out a star player like Foden, that's a pretty bold move.
Yeah, almost like they're not just reacting, they're being proactive.
Exactly. Then you've got those late substitutions in the 85th minute. For both teams, Manchester City brings in Rico Lewis and Cole Palmer for João Cancelo and Bernardo Silva. Leicester City puts in Jamie Vardy and Yuri Tielemans for Patson Daka and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall.
So are these just to give some of those less frequent players some time on the pitch? Or is there, a strategy here?
I think these late substitutions are telling a different story for each team. Yeah. For Manchester City, it's probably about, keeping players fresh and giving some other guys a chance to play. Right. But for Leicester, bringing in Vardy, he's their all-time top scorer, right? That tells me they weren't giving up yet.
Even when they're down 2-0 with only a few minutes left?
Hey, it's a long shot, but in football, you never know until that final whistle. And Vardy, he's known for those clutch goals. They were hoping for a miracle.
So we've looked at the goals, the yellow cards, all the substitutions, even checked out that attack momentum to get a feel for the game. It's amazing how much you can learn from just one match when you really look at it.
Oh, and we're just scratching the surface here. Imagine if we had even more data.
Yeah.
Right, like heat maps to show you how the players are moving, pass completion rates for different parts of the pitch, number of tackles, how far each player ran.
It'd be like seeing the whole match from a tactical point of view.
Exactly. That's why platforms like SofaScore are so useful if you want to really understand football.
Okay, so putting it all together, what does this match tell us? Besides the 2-0 score, of course.
On the surface, it looks like a pretty normal win for Manchester City. But when you look closer, you see these two teams with different goals, really battling it out. Manchester City, they're comfortable where they are in the league. They're playing smart, controlling the pace, and taking advantage of their chances.
They knew how to manage the game, especially after they got that first goal.
Exactly. And Leicester, well, they're in a tough spot. They need those points to stay in the Premier League. We see that in their, aggressive plays, those late substitutions, the fact that they never gave up.
Yeah, it seems like they were trying to throw Manchester City off their game any way they could.
For sure. And even though they showed some fight, Manchester City, with all their experience and skill, they just came out on top. Those two goals, especially Highland's, were just too good.
And that yellow card Ortega got for wasting time, that almost seems symbolic now, doesn't it?
Definitely adds a little drama to the whole thing. Manchester City knew how to protect their lead, even if it meant bending the rules a bit.
It's like every match is its own little story.
Absolutely. And for fans who want more than just the highlights, platforms like SofaScore, they give you the tools to analyze everything, like you're your own expert, breaking down the game and finding all those hidden stories.
It's almost like you can see what the coaches and players are thinking, right? You understand why they're making those choices. You see that back and forth, that tactical battle playing out.
It's like you're learning a new language, the language of football tactics. You start noticing things you might have missed before. Those small but important choices that can change a whole match.
So even a game that looks like a blowout, it can still be super interesting if you know how to look at it.
Exactly. It reminds you that every match, every player, every choice, it all adds up to this bigger story. That's the Premier League season.
And that's what makes football so great, right?
It really is.
It's a game of strategy, of skill, split-second decisions.
And even when the final whistle blows, you can always analyze it, debate it, and think about all the what-ifs.
Which brings us to that thought-provoking question you always like to leave our listeners with.
Okay, so picture this.
All right, I'm all ears.
You're the manager of either Leicester City or Manchester City.
Okay.
Knowing what we know now, having seen how this whole match played out, what would you have done differently?
Okay, let me put on my manager hat here. If I'm Leicester City, maybe I would have tried a more aggressive formation earlier on.
So you're thinking maybe try to disrupt Manchester City's rhythm right from the start.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe put in another attacker push higher up the pitch, try to catch them off guard.
That's a bold move going up against a team like Manchester City.
I know, it could totally backfire.
Could also force them to change their game plan, though.
Right. It's all about those calculated risks.
Exactly.
Now, if I'm Manchester City's manager, that's a tough one.
What's making you hesitate?
Well, they won pretty easily, but maybe I would have taken out some of those key players sooner. Just to avoid any chance of injuries.
The classic dilemma. Do you protect your lead or give those other players some valuable experience?
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the tough calls that make the difference between a good manager and a great one.
Yeah, it really shows you how much pressure those managers are under.
It's not just about tactics and formations. It's about handling your players, reading the game, knowing what your opponent's going to do next.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've uncovered a lot more than just a 2-0 scoreline in this match.
We really have. We've seen how looking closely at all that match data can tell you so much about team strategies, how the players are performing, and all the little tactical details that make football so interesting.
It just goes to show that every match is a story waiting to be told.
And with platforms like SofaScore, we can all be those storytellers.
You can understand the game at a whole other level, appreciate all the skill and the excitement that happens on the pitch every week.
And that's what makes being a football fan so great.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.